All right, folks. So thank you for joining us. This is going to be a little after party for Kwesi. I have a couple of comrades that are going to come on and join me in a second. We may possibly have a couple other folks, join us. I know this is a difficult time for folks at this time of year to come together, and it's also late if you're on the East Coast. So, um, anyway, we'll get right into it. I'm very excited about the two folks that are here with me now. One has been both of these folks have been on the podcast before. Sterling Johnson is a PhD candidate at Temple University, an organizer with Philadelphia Housing Action, and a harm reduction advocate. Some of Sterling's organizing efforts with Philadelphia Housing Action are detailed in the book How We Stay Free, and they have been an active participant in the struggle to save UC Townhomes. Yusef Bunchy Shakur is the son of Ava Jo and is well versed in the language and syntax of Black Detroit. As a father, author, and organizer, Yusuf epitomizes redemption and Black transformation from what he identifies as a street-holic, as a Black organic intellectual, and unorthodox leader. You can read the rest of their bios in the chat, but I do want to just bring these folks to the stage. Welcome to the stage. Also, just note that there's other audio conversations that you can find on millennials are killing capitalism. I'm as bad at saying that as all those elders were, so that's okay. Anyway, I appreciate you both joining me. I don't know if you were both able to catch the panel before, but I really wanted to have you here too to also offer your reflections on Kwesi. And then hopefully we can talk a little bit about some of the panel, and if folks have questions in the chat, then we can go there. So yeah, I don't know. Either one of you want to start? Sterling, do you have anything that you want to kind of say, initial reactions or thoughts?
I mean, it was just amazing. I don't know, to see those people together, to see them go back and forth, um, even around the different ideas of anarchism and the state power and some of those conversations that I think are still alive today. It was really amazing seeing them talk about that. I know, just I know I really like to think about what is some of the touchy feely parts that they were talking about. Thinking about like what are the sacrifices people are making that are what is it about taking care of people inside, which I have no experience with, but that just I don't know. It just meant a lot to me, sitting with people's humanity, um, and dealing with like whatever the mess is that is for all of us to like undo our mess, but also the fact that when people are coming in to struggle with you, they got to work on that too, you know. So I don't know. It just really gave me a lot of thoughts. Yeah, thanks.
Yeah. Yusuf, were you able to catch it?
I caught the half, like the last 30 minutes of it, 40, something like that.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Well,
I
what did
thought,
you? Yeah, go ahead.
no, obvious that the panel was politically rich. That the discourse was powerful. I'm not moved by words per se. The words are reflective in struggle. Each and every one of them has been part of struggle in some form, some fashion. I think David Gilbert said it best in terms of recognizing Kwesi and talking about political struggle. And I think they exemplify what ideological struggle looks like in real time. We tend to shy away from that because of we're not prepared. And I think the panel exemplified the person who they was recognizing, right? Very diverse, very thoughtful, evolving individual. Not sure, if they got into some of. You could praise a person, but also not necessarily critique. I know in David's book, there's some critique there related to the drug abuse. Not saying he was overly used, but in terms of that contribute to the Brinks case and incarceration, and also like folks was not necessarily doing the robbing the banks for liberation purposes. They rob and take care of their habits. I don't know crazy per se, but like looking at all the dynamics of the struggle. I know in the new book about the Shakur, the author had talked a lot about that in detail. Some of those dynamics.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I mean, I think David's reflections, were really interesting in the panel, and obviously reflected in his book as well, and even with kind of his, he in his In Love and Struggle, his book, he talks about, there's a politics of unconditional support, and he basically wants to kind of critique or maybe trouble that framework a bit, and basically after Brinks, for folks who don't know, he took a position of, people should support political prisoners for sure, but also it was the political prisoners' responsibility to be self-critical on their own actions as well, and that could contribute to, um, you know, bad outcomes basically, and so yeah, I mean, I think that was different. He talks in his book about how he differed from May 19th a little bit and how they wanted to analyze and think about Brinks. But the thing I appreciate about, rereading Quasi and thinking with David to some extent is, um, they were they're critical, like, I guess it reminds me of this. We had a conversation recently with Stephen Osuna on Mao's correct handling of contradictions amongst the people, and he talks about how, you need a criticism to build. Like there's in our society we tend to do a criticism to kind of tear down, right? But like being critical with the purpose of, um, critiquing our own actions to improve, you know and I think that, both Kwesi and David, kind of embody that, and as well as, I mean, I thought Ashanti was great in the panel with, some of his. I mean, everybody was amazing, but that was something that stood out, was kind of in reading Kwesi's work, and also, David's, is that shared kind of belief, and I think David said it as a quote, in the panel. He said, "We have a responsibility to analyze errors. We don't just extol ourselves as revolutionaries," right? And so it's not just about just claiming this mantle of revolution, but also being very serious about, analyzing our errors as well. And so, um, yeah, I don't say that to critique anybody, on the panel or in the movement, but just for as a principle, to sit with and think with. So, um, there was, there was another thing David brought up, which I think you saw in that panel too, right? Is this, as you said, Yusuf, you kind of talked about this, of the, ideological struggle, right? And I mean, you have David talks about, Kwesi being an anarchist, um, Sekou Odinga being a Muslim, and himself being, a kind of third world Marxist, and them being in this situation where they are all at the same prison. They've all been, locked up, associated with the same case. And, um, it could have gone any number of ways with their political different disagreements or orientations. But their ability to have their internal struggles and discussions, but keep it all, in what seems, from David's rendering at least, to be a very positive, kind of culture among the three of them. And I don't know if that stood out to you, or if there was anything along those lines in the panel. I felt that spirit a lot within. There was a lot of disagreement, I felt like, in the panel, but it was very, um, comradely, I would say.
Well, I don't know if it was spoken before I got on in relationship to the New African independence movement, the New African struggle. The three individuals that you just named, and some of that their political religious difference. However, they function and operated within the container of the New African struggle of fighting for land independence. And that's the unique thing about the New African independence movement, particular where not everybody we all believe in land and independence, but we all may not see it through the same ideological lens, such as an anarchist, a Marxist, a Christian, a Muslim, and and I think that didn't necessarily, well, the part I was listening didn't come up. I know when the Quay, when she reads something from Quasi and she talks and reference him as a new African soldier, and when we go back and read his book, when he's in court, that's what he's eloquently making the demarcation that we're fighting for liberation, we're fighting for independence. I do not recognize this empire. That we have a right to own our own nation, etc. And so, and I get it, the history of the Panthers and the BLA, which we all salute, but at that time it transcended. I mean, the Panthers was no longer the Black liberation had became what it became, and folks had evolved and found themselves into other struggles. And it's important to not, we have to name that, and naming that they was, a lot of those struggles and things they was participating was leading towards new African liberation.
I did want to say too how it seemed like such principled disagreement among people that I guess it really came up when Meyer was referring to you're building a world where many worlds can fit. That people are having these differences, as we have here, in today's world, where there's queer people, there's people with disabilities, but you're still trying to build this world where each people of difference are able to have solidarity across that, and then I guess how that. I think this showed me like what we just saw was like a really good example of how people could have that in real time. That was the most exciting part about it. It wasn't well, I don't know. It wasn't about like calling out like these allies that maybe you had a thing with, but maybe we need more conflict resolution that involves that,
And
Yeah.
piggyback on Sterling Firm, I think what gets underlined or missed a lot is the maturity. I mean, we're talking about individuals who all went through high level of struggles, high level of failure, some level of success to get to this stage, and they're not pulling out the machetes and the machine guns trying to kill each other. Their egos have been grinded out of them, where they're able to see the objective, to be able to peacefully disagree. And I think that the ability to create at some point to unpack some of those things, like we heard, the difference in anarchists, and we know there's different versions of anarchists. We and other things that was talked about. Around sexuality, around feminism. Like there's different versions of those things, and I think that's part of political education to be able to pull them out. And I think they laid a foundation that we need to see to how to have political responsible conversation that's not catered towards liberalism.
Yeah, appreciate that. So let's see. And I thought the part about Kwesi as his sexuality, I think is an interesting thing to hear folks from that generation talk about it to some degree, because um obviously it was a very different time around this, right? And so you do have, with the late 60s, you get Stonewall, right? You get the beginning of um what then was called the gay liberation movement. But it's not I think a lot of times we project our current moment sort of back on, and I think that it's interesting just even hearing folks say like, look, we didn't talk about that. Like it wasn't a part of how it was. And I think it's, you know, I think there's one way to read that that's not very generous, right? But I think there's a way to also read it and just sort of understand that, like, generationally and what they were dealing with, that I mean, even I thought an interesting part is Meg Starr, right, who talked about how she identified as lesbian at the time, but neither her nor Kwesi ever talked about that. So I mean, that's an interesting dynamic there too, because they're having these individual conversations and writing to one another, and it never came up from either side. And this is in, at this point in the early to mid 80s. And so, I think that's just an important thing for folks to keep in mind. It doesn't take anything away from Kwesi on an identity level, and people, you know, um, identifying with him or sympathizing or raising him up as a example, I think, of like, a black queer anarchist, elder or anything like that. I think that that's legitimate too, right? But I think that it is interesting just to kind of deal with that fact, that like there were differences that people just didn't talk that much about because they were focused on something very specific in terms of their struggle at the time, and it wasn't necessarily centered around, you know I mean, in Kwesi's case, it doesn't seem like it was centered around gay liberation as like the primary thing that he was focused on in terms of his political work at that time, you know. Um
I'm gonna say real quick, in my studies about the Black Liberation movement, the Panthers, BLA. I mean, they get a lot of criticism, of being undeveloped in a lot of things. The sexism is still upholding patriarchy values and etc. But then on another level, they was advanced in their thinking too. There's advanced in their political practice, in particular. I think around Kwesi and his sexuality to be, it was never an issue. And to not, to my knowledge, the things I've read, the comrades speaking about, and then you go across the aisle, looking at the civil rights movement, the movie that just comes out about Byron Rustin and what he suffered from as a result of, and many others, right? So we see in these two contrasting dynamics, and I'm not saying it was all perfect either, but there was some advancement there in terms of political thought in relationship to where we're now just catching up in terms of now where we are in our struggle of being able to disability, lesbian, etc., and having those conversations and seeing and not worrying about a person's sexuality, but more worrying about their values and their commitment.
Yeah, and I just want to say, because I think it's important to say this, because it does come up with the Panthers a lot, and I think that I think there's plenty to unpack and study and think about there. There were also attempts and structures that were put in place and ways that they tried to deal with patriarchy within their time. And I think if you look at other organizations, like you're saying, Yusef, within that era, you know, it's not like I think they were way behind where other revolutionary organizations or civil rights organizations or other groups were at the time. And so I think in some ways this has been built up, through a lot of criticism that has been, particularly in academia, a lot of it. But um, not to, and it's not at all to dismiss it or to say that it wasn't a struggle, right? I think it was, but I think that there can be a way where you kind of cherry pick one example and say, oh, well, let's talk about patriarchy in this context. And, you know, are we talking about that as a fair analysis and comparison with other organizations or general society at the time? I don't think that is usually done in a very rigorous way that way. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, I'd agree. I mean, there are things that it's not like people weren't inside trying to fight against it, weren't creating spaces for themselves. I think that almost kind of takes agency away from the people from within, especially the femme people, which, there aren't people here to talk about that. But, I think maybe that'd be an even another perspective. But I can talk as like a queer Black person that, like, yeah, of course there's homophobia, transphobia to be fought with them, but so that's within the gay movement as well. That's in the gay movement right now. There's so much racism that occurs within it that you're not that, like, honestly, we're looking for places where we can, like, understand Blackness as a as an analytic, anti-blackness as an analytic, but also organizing with like queer people that are there. That's why, and then I think lastly, which I think we're talking about here, are like, honestly, to the point of like, are you ready to actually do it? Those are the people I want to also work with. Like, I feel like, and that comes in no shade, but like the willingness to make that sacrifice. And honestly, we're not doing any tests on that. The test is whether you're with us at the end. That's what it is, and I feel like that's like that's what it comes down to.
Yeah. I mean, it was interesting on that panel because the question about sacrifice that I asked sort of became a question about personal sacrifice, I guess, in terms of like sacrificing maybe aspects of yourself or whatever. And like that wasn't entirely what I meant. I mean, I think that's part of it, but I was really actually thinking too about coming to grips with, you know, with taking activity, doing activity, knowing that repression is a very likely outcome, trying to do your best to avoid obviously those negative outcomes, right? But like you read this through Panther literature, you read it through revolutionary literature broadly, right? Like you have to accept the bad things that can happen in order to wage those kinds of movements, and I think that is something that I'm constantly wrestling with and thinking about, as somebody who admittedly, am not sacrificing a lot myself right now. Right. But I think within even organizing and stuff, we've become, I think, almost overly conscious a lot of times of not transgressing the boundaries of legality, even when the stakes of that may not be that significant sometimes. And I mean, I don't know. I mean, part of the reason that Sterling, I did invite you on is because I think when I think about, Kwesi, part of it is with Orsami Burton's book, Tip of the Spear. And, in that there's this discussion about leverage that Kwesi is interested in. Obviously, in Kwesi's instance, it was actually about taking hostages and how to deal with that situation within New York City jails. But which is obviously a very serious, level of struggle that we're talking about in that instance. But, you know, even within your housing organizing, you've been a part of with others, you all have, in many ways, I think, been folks who have pushed the envelope here in Philadelphia in terms of being willing to take risks that are necessary to advance the struggle that you're involved in. And I think that's, I just commend you on that, but I think it's an important part of organizing that actually has the capability of winning campaigns, and so, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, we've taken none of the risks that were mentioned by those individuals, but when it comes to we're seeing these things happen in the free speech, in the quote unquote free speech struggles around like saying free Palestine and then not expecting anything bad. It's like, yeah, you're going to end up on Canary Mission. You're gonna these are the things that kind of happen. There's going to be attacks against you, you're going to be called anti-Semitic. These are all things, right? So and I feel like there's a difference, between like what used to happen where people are like, look people in the face and they're like, yeah, I said that. That's what I said. And I will say it over and over again, compared to like a little bit of the like especially these Ivy League situations where like people are like, oh, well, now I won't get my job that like I was promised or something. That's not everybody, but a lot of people, and I respect so many of the Penn people that we've been working with, some of the students, where they're like, yeah, I said that, and I'll say it again. Like, what, you're not going to hire me that's fine. You're going to arrest me. I'm going to give me whatever you want. I respect those people much more because they understood what the assignment was. At least when it comes to that, that's nothing compared to dealing with the state, going to prison, going to jail. That's nothing.
No. I think the huge difference in the time of struggle we're in versus the just overall in the past is the level of commitment. And as the level of commitment grew through different levels of struggle, produced or advanced levels of sacrifice. And again, you can't have sacrifice without commitment. Sure, was there some individual who accidentally found themselves in some sacrificial positions? Probably so, but overall, I mean, when we look at Sekou Odinga, his work, right? I mean, you can have Kuwasi Balagoon on one side of a coin and Sekou Odinga on the other side, and his ability to escape capture, go over into Algeria, wherever's in Africa, right? And
Yeah,
then
it was Algeria.
yeah, Algeria, and then come back. He didn't have to come back. He could have just chilled, but his commitment to the struggle, and he said, okay, the struggle died over here. It ain't Algeria on some bullshit. Let me go back where I can make a difference, right? I remember reading. I can't remember her name. She was a white political prisoner, former member of the Weather Underground. And when many folks she was for that era when they was getting captured, they was like, "Man, the empire won't live. You give me 50, 40 years, the empire won't be around that long." I mean,
Is that
this
Marilyn Buck, maybe?
not Marilyn Buck.
No,
It's another
no.
shit.
Laura Whitehorn? I don't know.
Not Lauren. You
No, yeah.
the other. Then she came home after Lauren.
Okay.
The point is, like most all of them, they believe they in their bones that the empire was going to crumble. Do we have that same belief today to be able to go against the empire with that level of commitment to make the level of sacrifices that's necessary to win liberation? And and that comes out of cultivating relationship. Again, I think going back to the panel, you get a sense of love that they had for each other, a sense of admiration, a sense of respect, and that makes it easy to sacrifice. So when you're valued in something, and I think in today's time, in the movement, some will question: are we even in a movement period? Are we in moment period? I think that can be a made argument, but movement in terms of things being intersected, organizing, figuring out how to. I mean, just from the basic level, a sterling example of protest. Like it's so far in between. That was the beautiful thing being in Ferguson, like seeing that happen firsthand. I'd never seen that shit. Even I was politically developed. I knew a lot, but it expanded and gave me a different education than I didn't see. And I think we have so many folks that's so quick to try to reincarnate or in their mind the Black Liberation Army versus like we just need to politically educate ourselves. We need to politically organize ourselves because whatever it's going to be, it's going to be. That's because the struggle is going to demand that we continue to grow, we continue to advance on how we move because we have enough example. The argument shouldn't be whether we defend ourselves or should we take peaceful. We need to do whatever the offense, defense, whatever that is. But learning from the lessons, and I think that was a beautiful thing. Some of the lessons that was coming out, I think panels like that, it get too much glorifying and shit. With a lot of the folks that you miss the lessons. You just people trying to live in the past versus learning from the past to change the future.
Right on. I appreciate that. I was looking for a couple of different things that I had, kind of underlined in Kwesi's book. Um, there's some great. I mean, it's people should get this book if they don't have it because there's just a lot of like really short, concise. Yeah, there's the original. um, uh, you know, like I mean, there's criticisms, but there's also like a lot of wisdom, and it's really interesting. I mean, I think one of the things I wanted to kind of look at with it was how he talks about his anarchism, because like as Ashanti Austin said, like there's so many different things that can mean, just like anything else. I mean, socialism, Marxism, nationalism, etc. Um, but it in a lot of his writing later on, in the 80s, right? Like there's this piece where he's talking about Sakai's settlers, and he talks about a lot of the areas where he agrees with it and what he finds interesting in it. Um, but he's like, it says, where I differ with Sakai is the assertion that building mass institutions and movements of a specific national character under the leadership of a communist party are absolute necessities for the oppressed. What communist party is he talking about? I feel that we must build revolutionary institutions that buttress our survival through collectives, which in turn should form federations. Grassroots collective building can begin immediately, right? And so, like, I think this is also, it relates on some level whether people want to ascribe to an anarchist framework or something else. But to that question that you were talking about a little bit, Yusef, just in terms of what can people do, and how do you, Kwesi saw a very specific role in terms of building institutions, building, he was thinking about, he talks about, let's see if I can find it. He talks about some different activities, um but and federating them, which a lot of ways you can see the influence of, you know, and I know that like Kali Akuno, has named the education center that they have down there in Jackson after Kuwasi Balagoon. But you could see some of the seeds of, some of his thinking, right, around kind of, creating cooperatives and communal institutions and then federating them out and connecting that way, and so it's just interesting, I think, to see some of those lineages too in his work, and those pieces. Yeah. Comment from the chat. I would love to. So I've asked multiple times to try to get Sakai on. Hasn't worked out as of yet, but I still keep my fingers crossed that someday it will. Do either of you have things from Kwesi's writings or just things about Kwesi's legacy that you wanted to point to or that are really meaningful for you?
For me, I learned about Kwesi not through his Panther days or BLA, but more so through the New African struggle when I became a member of the New African Independence Movement. His celebrated soldier, obviously through there, I learned about his other works. And I mean, in my early 20s, when I am recruited in the New African Independence Movement, there's not a lot of political discourse around sexuality, and again, inside of prison, there's a dynamic of sexuality, which is a whole nother conversation. However, learning about Kwesi and seeing this individual committed on the level that he was committed, it just puts things in perspective, right? And then there's this level of ultra militant, ultra revolutionary, heterosexual type of person, right? Just beating their chest King Kong, and you show them Kwesi, like, you ain't got shit on Kwesi, bro. Like, and in particular, individuals who are taking, pushing the line, borderline homophobia type of behavior, right? And when they learn about Kwesi, they couldn't say shit. They pretty much shitted on themselves, like, wow, this motherfucker, he was a soldier for real. And but again, I mean, if you looked at just through the lens of this negative sexuality lens, you don't see his humanity. And that was the ability to help some, not everybody, but a few of them to make that breakthrough. Even being home, particularly in the era of Facebook, we got so many armchair revolutionaries and shit. And I think he's been a great example in illustrating folks to be able to see beyond sexual politics and seeing the revolutionary dynamics of transforming ourselves to be our best selves as revolutionaries.
Yeah, I mean, I think the part that always interested me was just thinking about Black anarchism, which has always been the or just anarchism in general. I just don't. It's very hard for me to be a part of any anarchist like space, because it doesn't. It always is full of white supremacy, and then even Black anarchism. It's just, at least in terms of my dealings with people, has been on mostly individual basis. So I've just been like kind of out here just trying to make alliances with people that are going to do the work. So, but he like proposes a vision that is what I think if more people became more read up on, especially around like thinking about like this indigenous kind of like different co-ops and federations that are in an alliance across the city. I mean, I think, I've heard some people, I feel like some people in Philly that have talked about that. They're like, yeah, let's get this land alliance where everyone's like taking apart the city, where if somebody comes in the city, then like we all go behind it. And I'm like, that's like a Black anarchist vision. We're like, yeah, we got like, we run a community land trust, and people are like, yeah, you should get a lot. You should run like you should get like 3,000. I'm like, no, we want to form our own. You form your own in your neighborhood. You form that, and then we create alliances, right? You create a federation, and that's the sort of thing that I feel like I get it from like people like Kuwasi, but just like in general, when like I look towards the past about like what needs to be done, it's not building these big institutions, but like revolutionary institutions. And it's pretty hard. I will say there's something about the trust that people have with each other and how that is built that like I guess I want to pose to you all, because that thing is like people are going through things. All those people, they didn't have to kind of question each other because they've been through a lot, right? So, but like when I think about like the ins and outs of the people I've been through, and then like sometimes some people, it's like, yeah, that's a grand betrayal that like you will never forget, or that person that didn't show up at that time for that thing. They're not, those people aren't really talking about it, but I do feel like that comes up in our struggles, because like people that were fighting for stuff in 2015, especially around harm reduction, they're gone. And I've been doing this for like 10 years in Philly, and it's like there's like a new crop every few years.
Yeah, so
and I guess we're talking about commitment. We're talking about the commitment. What is you said you were just talking about commitment. Yeah, there isn't a commitment. There isn't commitment. And it's like, and what is like, where does that come from for people? Or they want to get famous or something. Or like they didn't know that it was just going to be spreadsheets and endless meetings on a Friday night or something. They didn't know that. And I was like, oh, welcome to the thing. Yeah, it's just like all like having real arguments about like real decisions that we have to make, and sometimes we're yelling at each other, but like I don't know, it's not easy.
I remember reading Jamal Joseph's book, Baby Panther, and he becomes a member. I believe the deputy minister of defense was ultimately become he was a police informant. However, when Jamal comes in, he's like, man, because he was just so excited to join the Panthers because he wanted his gun. He's like, man, where my damn gun at? Where my gun at? And dude walked him in there, and he opened Foot Locker and gave him a bunch of books. Like, here's your gun. And that point is so important, because here was a police informant, but the structure was so dynamic, it made him perform around the structure to exhibit the commitment, right? And there was a whole bunch of egos, during that time period, but also it doesn't get lifted up either. I think that Quee was talking about like the humanity of the rank and file. Like we talk about Huey, we talk about Elger, we just talk about Stada Shakur to some degree because she became very popular. But the rank and file is what made our organizations, what made our movements, and that was that commitment, that was that sacrifice, that love, the ability to follow orders. I mean, some of them they question, some of them. I remember even reading in Sophia Bakari, this is after the split. She gets a call, and Elder Cleaver, and he on some bullshit, and she questions him. She's like, I was never a follower. Like, if it makes sense, I'm gonna follow. But if it don't make sense, I'm gonna question it. Again, these things that are not talked about, we can't afford to thus throw everything away without examining the good and the bad. Like Elder, like we just can't afford to just throw him away. We have to examine him and learn the bullshit, because it's still being repeated to some degree. We Angela, like, comparing, analyzing Angela Davis of the past versus the Angela Davis of today, to be able to understand how did that happen. How do you, there's some similarities, but there's some contrasting differences, and we just can't just throw her in the bucket. And I've come to that realization within the last couple of years, because within our struggle, it's so easy just to throw folks. And I think that's the level of commitment, but commitment requires work, and that commitment requires, you might be the motherfucker that's on the door, you might be the motherfucker that's sweeping the floor. Like, but are you willing to play those roles? And I think that, I'll just conclude on this. I remember watching the Shake and Mirror movie, and he met a young dude out in the woods. He like, man, again, where the gun at? And Shake was like, can you type? Do you know how to cook? Like, it's not about picking up the gun. It's a tool. It's a means, but that's not the primary thing. Are you diversifying your thinking, your ability? Again, like, before you can shoot a gun, can you walk a mile? Can you go a couple of days without eating? Like, these are the sacrifices. Because what we know in a political struggle like ours, the repression is real. And I think the biggest lesson out of our movement, they underestimated the level of repression that we will get. We can't afford that, because that lesson is at our doorstep. And if we don't learn that lesson, we're doomed 3 times worse than what they was.
Appreciate that. I want to read. Oh, go ahead. Go ahead.
I did just want to say, I mean, it was mentioned a few times about the love that there was shown between people. I think especially between Black men specifically. I feel Mamiya, it talks about this so much about like the care that is shown between like men in jail and in prison, and I think some of the ways that Kuwasi like mentions, just like being there for people and watching out for, it's just like I can't think, but it's just, I don't know. At a time when we're men are not supposed to be caring for people, when there are like Black and brown children that are being told that like they are 4 years old and they need to be killed, in Gaza. It's like I just, or oftentimes we're putting like children and women in these. But what about the men? What about the men? Mm-hmm. And that's what I often, I'm just here. That's what I am. I'm just like, no, we're gonna care for you. And I know, at least as men, like we were raised in misogyny and a lot of screwed up stuff. And honestly, I mean, it is our job to hold each other. Honestly, it's like we have to. And I don't want to put it on the femme people. It's like, no, we have to hold each other. I just refuse to throw people away. And that's what we see constantly. I mean, that's what they do to us. So I won't do it. But we also got to hold each other accountable, which is that thing. I think that is such a different way of looking at the revolutionary struggle, especially when we talk about harm reduction. People, if you're doing stuff on the street, if you're selling dope on the street, you give people the tools to survive too. That's like the thing that like some of I feel like white people in harm reduction aren't like able to say that, but like I'm like, nah, you got to give naloxone. Nah, don't try to kill people. You've got fentanyl and that, like, you can't just be doing that. You can't be just sticking your fentanyl in some coke, there's all that stuff, or don't do it. Or you can't. If you're going to be here and you're going to do this and you're going to be us doing what you can't be. That's the stuff that people are afraid to say. But like, I think if we're talking about real revolutionary struggle, about what you're doing when you're doing shit that's like really, really might get you all fucked up, you got to be able to say that to your, like, when you're on the front line. You have to.
Yeah. I think one example of that we might uplift as, again, a
Yeah.
lesson for folks, I mean,
And that's
is
love. I'm
is
just saying that's love too.
yeah, absolutely, absolutely. But like I think about, and David talked about at the beginning, David Gilbert, about Kwesi, and about, Kwesi standing up for, the prisoners who the other prisoners who had AIDS, right? And standing, combating the homophobia and whatnot from other prisoners. But David didn't talk about like what he did too. And I think that that's really important, is like David, as well as a lot of the other political prisoners in that era, folks from Weather, folks from other organizations, they really led the charge around AIDS in prisons, after Kwesi, died. And they organized around it, right? They got and I mean, that was a hard struggle, but that, talk about like a harm reduction struggle. I mean, you're in a situation where the state didn't care about AIDS as it was, as like a crisis, right? You think they care about it in prisons, especially when it's taking out like revolutionaries and stuff like that? No, of course not, and so that I think that example, um, is just a really important one. And I can't remember which of his books he talks about it the most, but I know that it is something that he's written about as well. And was very much inspired, I think, to take up that struggle because of Kwesi, because of that relationship, as well as, seeing Kwesi, you know, pass away of AIDS related illness, so. Yeah. So I want to read one thing. So this is just, first of all, folks, if you've never read this, I really suggest it as a piece. It's called Anarchy Can't Fight Alone. And so I'm not going to read the whole thing. Folks can find it. It's pretty short. If you go to like the Anarchist Library, they have all of Kwesi's stuff for free too. But I also encourage folks to get the book if they don't have it. So I'm just going to read this short passage. So, where we live and work, we must not only escalate discussion in study groups, we must also organize on the ground level. Landlords must be contested through rent strikes. Rather than develop strategies to pay the rent, we should develop strategies to take the buildings. We must not only recognize the squatters movement for what it is, but support and embrace it. Set up communes in abandoned buildings, sell scrap cars and aluminum cans, turn vacant lots into gardens. When our children grow out of clothes, we should have places where we can take them, clearly marked anarchist clothing exchanges, and have no bones about looking for clothing there first. And of course, we should relearn how to preserve food. We must learn construction and ways to take back our lives, help each other move, and stay in shape. Let's keep the American and Canadian flags flying at half mast. I refuse to believe that direct action has been captured. And that whole a lot of what he writes in that piece is a critique, and there's a critique of white anarchists and the types of anarchism that he's seeing. So I think this is important for people to understand too, is it's not just like Kwesi embraced anarchism and, wasn't critical of what he saw in terms of anarchism. He was, but he also is critical of, Marxists and nationalists within that piece, and, what they're doing and not doing, and as well as in other pieces. And so, again, like that thing we started with about that kind of criticism with the idea of building, of putting forward, you know what ideas of what people can do, building movements, I think is a really important thing. And people may not agree with Kwesi on that vision, but at least he's stating his disagreements, stating his positions, and putting forward a vision. And I think that combined with all the other stuff, right? Because he was also, I mean, like you said, Bunchy, earlier, like the stories that you get, the real soldier stories, right, are just amazing, and we got a couple of those in the beginning from Bilal. Um, but I and as well from Ashanti, talking about like hearing them, and the kind of how that the impact that had on him. But I think that it's important to like not kind of pick one thing with Kwesi and think about him as just a soldier, or think about him as any other of the boxes. I think that was one of the other things that I took away from the panel, was just that he didn't allow himself to just be labeled and contained. He was always sort of, growing, right, and changing and building. And so I appreciate that as well. I don't know. Thanks for coming through. I know we said we'd wrap up around this time. I don't know if there's anything else that you all wanted to get in before we do go.
I just want to say real quick. That passage that you read was powerful. It is beyond the critique that he's exhibiting, but also a visionary, a theoretician, a very practical. When you think about the time when he wrote that, right? And nowadays, some of those things are being done, but very few are being done from a grassroots standpoint. Most of these things are done through the nonprofit industrial complex, which has undermined it, crippled our ability to control, determine our communities. And just conclude on this. I think it's important, whatever we call ourselves. If you really think about a free world, a better world, it's important that you read everything. And how many of you have a Quasi book in your library, and to be able to read and to be able to, because I think he may get treated on two folds the way some people treat Marxists, in which he deserves criticism as a result of some of the racist tone that he has in his writings. However, there's still some good shit there as well. And Quasi, because of the anarchists, people may get turned off, or because of the sexuality, people get turned off. This is where, again, where we have to challenge ourselves to be able to move beyond. And I think for what makes me embrace being a New African revolutionary nationalist is, New African is my identity, but the revolutionary keeps the nationalist. It challenges the nationalist in me to not be narrow, but then the narrow keeps the revolutionary in me focused as well. Like, they complement each other. And I think folks, we still are functioning in these narrow perspectives, and I think Quasi work will allow us to expand our thinking, and expand our thinking, we can grow.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great place to. Yeah, Sterling, do you want to say something?
That exactly. It's like we can grow.
Yeah.
We can grow. There's possibility. I love it.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, I'm gonna leave it there because I appreciate you both, and I hope to have you both on, individually, collectively at another time, and we could talk about some other stuff. Really appreciate this conversation, as well, of course, to the panel before. Thanks to the folks in the audience for coming through. That is it for today. So I'm gonna get us out of here.